She finds him standing on the corner of Elm and Main, looking like a man who'd been spun around 3 times blindfolded and then asked to recite the alphabet backwards. He clutched a city map with the frantic grip of a shipwreck survivor clinging to driftwood, its creases already mapping out his distress. His clothes, Mia noted with a flicker of amusement, were expensive. A linen shirt that probably cost more than her monthly rent, impeccably cut trousers, but they were rumpled, as if he'd slept in them, or perhaps wrestled a small badger. He was staring up at the Havenwood, the city's newest, shiniest, and most intimidatingly luxurious hotel, with an expression of profound bewilderment, as if it were a mirage he couldn't quite believe. He looked, in short, like the dictionary definition of lost tourist. Mia, on her way to her afternoon shift at the Daily Grind coffee shop, paused. She had a soft spot for the hopelessly directionless, a trait that often led to convoluted detours and late arrivals. But today, something about his particularly acute state of confusion tugged at her. He sighed, a gusty sound that ruffled his already tousled dark hair, and turned the map upside down. "Excuse me," he said, his voice surprisingly deep and smooth, a contrast to his flustered appearance as he finally noticed her. "I seem to be navigationally challenged. I'm looking for the Havenwood." He gestured vaguely towards the gleaming edifice behind him. Mia suppressed a smile. "You found it," she said kindly. "You're practically standing on its very expensive welcome mat." He blinked, looking from the hotel back to his map, then to her. A slow flush crept up his neck. "Oh, right. Well, this is it, then." He sounded less than convinced. "It's bigger than it looks on the brochure." "They usually are," Mia agreed, a smile finally breaking through. He had kind eyes, she noticed, a warm hazel that crinkled at the corners even when he wasn't quite smiling. "Are you checking in?" "Something like that," he murmured, still looking a bit dazed. He ran a hand through his hair, making it stand up even more endearingly. "I just need to get to the entrance." "It's just around that corner," she said, pointing. "Big glass doors, hard to miss. Unless you're actively trying to, of course." He gave a short, self-deprecating laugh. "You'd be surprised at my talent for missing the obvious." He looked at her then, a directness in his gaze that was surprisingly intense. "Look, I know this is a lot to ask, but would you mind just pointing me in the exact direction? Walking me there, even? I seem to have misplaced my sense of direction along with my luggage, apparently." Mia hesitated. She really should get to work. But there was a genuine appeal in his awkward plea, a vulnerability that disarmed her usual cynicism about well-heeled tourists. "Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you believe love should feel like freedom, hit that like button and subscribe." He had no idea that this charmingly down-to-earth woman, who seemed to navigate the city streets with an easy grace he could only envy, was about to show him more of his city and himself than he'd ever seen from his penthouse suite. And she had no idea her simple act of kindness, guiding a man who couldn't find his own ridiculously expensive front door, was about to become the most interesting detour her life had taken in years. Mia glanced at her watch. "All right," she said, making a snap decision. "But you owe me a coffee if I'm late for work. A really good one." His face lit up with a relieved smile. "Deal. Lead the way." And just like that, a stranger with expensive, rumpled clothes and a talent for getting lost became her responsibility, at least for the next 200 feet. Mia lived in a small, slightly lopsided apartment above a bakery, a fact usually announced by the perpetual scent of warm bread and cinnamon that clung to her clothes and hair. It was a cozy chaos of overflowing bookshelves, half-finished art projects, and a cat named Schrödinger who mostly existed in a state of quantum napping. She worked part-time at the Daily Grind, not for the love of frothing milk, but because it paid the bills and allowed her flexible hours to pursue her real passion, painting vibrant, impressionistic cityscapes of the town she knew like the back of her hand. She loved its quirks, its hidden alleyways, the way the morning light caught the old brick buildings. The Havenwood, with its sleek, modern lines and aura of untouchable luxury, felt like an alien spaceship landed in the middle of her familiar world. It represented a kind of wealth and detachment she found both fascinating and slightly repellent. Her companion, who introduced himself as Leo as they walked the short distance, seemed oblivious to the imposing grandeur of the hotel he was supposedly staying at. He was more interested in the graffiti art on a nearby wall, the smell of roasting nuts from a street vendor, the way a group of pigeons scattered indignantly at their approach. He asked questions, not about the best restaurants or tourist traps, but about the history of a particular building or why a certain street was named as it was. Mia found herself answering with an enthusiasm she usually reserved for her closest friends. As they reached the ridiculously opulent main entrance of the Havenwood, complete with uniformed doormen who looked like they could bench press a small car, Leo hesitated. He glanced at a glossy magazine displayed on a nearby newsstand. The cover featured a somewhat blurry, paparazzi-style shot of a man in a sharp suit, half-turned from the camera, under a headline, "The Enigmatic Mr. Thorne. Havenwood's reclusive scion shakes up luxury hospitality." Leo's gaze flickered over it, and he quickly looked away, a strange expression crossing his face before he smoothed it into another charmingly helpless smile. "Well, here we are," Mia said, gesturing to the gleaming revolving doors. "Safe and sound." She felt an odd reluctance to just leave him there. He seemed less lost now, but still a little adrift. "Thanks to you," he said, his hazel eyes warm. "I'd probably still be deciphering that map like it was the Rosetta Stone." He paused. "About that coffee I owe you. Are you busy right now?" Mia thought of Mr. Henderson, her boss, who had a strict policy on tardiness and a face that could curdle milk when displeased. "I'm actually on my way to work. The daily grind, just down the street." "Perfect," Leo said, a little too quickly. "Then perhaps, after your shift? Or tomorrow? I'd love to buy you that coffee. And maybe you could tell me more about those pigeons." They seemed very opinionated. Mia laughed. There was something undeniably appealing about him, a boyish charm mixed with an undercurrent of something else she couldn't quite name. "Tomorrow might work," she found herself saying. "But I picked the place. Somewhere local. Not here." She gestured vaguely at the marble and glass monolith. He grinned. "I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm keen to see the real town. My travel agent booked this place. A bit impersonal for my taste." He almost stumbled over the words, and Mia caught a fleeting glimpse of something that didn't quite fit, a brief flash of authority, or perhaps just discomfort. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual affable demeanor. "Tomorrow, then," she confirmed, a strange flutter in her chest. "I get off at 2. 2 it is," he said, his smile lingering. "I'll, try not to get lost between now and then." Mia walked away towards the daily grind, a smile playing on her own lips. He was a bit odd, this Leo, with his expensive clothes and his touristy helplessness, but he was also interesting. She found herself looking forward to tomorrow, a feeling that was as unfamiliar as it was pleasant. The next day, Leo was waiting outside the daily grind at precisely 2 o'clock, looking considerably less rumpled but still endearingly out of place amidst the hustle of local coffee drinkers. He'd swapped the linen shirt for a soft, dark sweater that looked deceptively simple but Mia suspected cost a small fortune. He'd managed to find her small, unassuming coffee shop without assistance, a fact he seemed quite proud of. "No map today?" Mia teased as she emerged, shrugging off her apron. "Progress," he said with a mock-serious expression. I even resisted the urge to ask a pigeon for directions. She led him to Rosie's, a tiny, bustling diner a few blocks away, famous for its mismatched formica tables, its sassy waitresses, and its artery-clogging but delicious blueberry pie. Leo looked around with wide, fascinated eyes, as if he'd stumbled into an undiscovered anthropological exhibit. "This is authentic," he said, sliding into a cracked vinyl booth. "It's Rosie's," Mia said, grinning. "The pie will change your life. Or at least your cholesterol levels." Over lukewarm coffee and enormous slices of pie, they talked. Mia, usually reserved with strangers, found herself opening up about her art, her dreams of one day having her own small gallery. Leo listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, his gaze never wavering from hers. He spoke little about himself, offering vague comments about being in transition and exploring new places. He claimed to be a writer, working on a novel, which explained his keen observations and slightly romantic view of the world. He was, Mia decided, incredibly easy to be around. He had a quiet humor that caught her off guard and a way of making her feel like the most fascinating person in the room. There were, however, small inconsistencies. Once, his phone buzzed, an insistent, discreet vibration. He glanced at it, his brow furrowing for a split second at whatever name flashed on the screen, then quickly silenced it, murmuring, probably just spam. But the brief tightening of his jaw suggested otherwise. Another time, discussing the local economy, he made a surprisingly astute comment about commercial real estate trends that seemed beyond the ken of a wandering novelist. He quickly covered it with a self-deprecating joke about reading too many financial blogs. Mia filed these little oddities away. Everyone had their quirks, and she was enjoying his company too much to interrogate him. Over the next week, Leo became a pleasant fixture in Mia's routine. He'd meet her after her shift, always with a new suggestion for a place to explore, gleaned from local guidebooks he claimed to be devouring. They wandered through the botanical gardens, Leo marveling at the resilience of a stubborn weed pushing through a crack in the pavement. He helped her carry a ridiculously oversized canvas she bought back to her apartment, nearly tripping over Schrödinger twice and apologizing profusely to the cat, who merely yawned with regal indifference. He insisted on experiencing her attempt to fix a leaky faucet in her tiny kitchen, a project that ended with them both soaked and laughing, the faucet dripping more defiantly than before. He eventually, and very discreetly, called a plumber the next day, claiming he'd found a guy who owed him a favor. Mia had raised an eyebrow but hadn't pressed. She found herself noticing things, the impeccable stitching on the inside of his supposedly ordinary jacket when he hung it over a chair, the way his cheap, tourist shop watch strap was attached to a timepiece that, on closer inspection, looked suspiciously like a Patek Philippe, his innate, almost unconscious courtesy, the way he always held doors or subtly positioned himself on the street side of the pavement. He was falling into the rhythm of her life, yet parts of him remained a carefully guarded mystery. When she asked about his family or where he grew up, his answers were charmingly vague, redirecting the conversation back to her with practiced ease. He seemed to be carrying a weight, a subtle tension around his eyes that would appear when he thought she wasn't looking. One afternoon, as they were browsing in a dusty old bookstore, one of Mia's favorite haunts, she saw him staring at a display of local history books. He picked one up, a history of the city's development, and flipped through it, his expression unreadable. "Thinking of setting your novel here?" Mia asked lightly. He started, almost guiltily. "Oh, yes. Just research." He quickly put the book back, but not before Mia saw his finger trace the outline of a chapter heading, "The Rise of Havenwood Hospitality, from Local into Global Empire." A small seed of doubt, previously just a faint niggle, began to sprout. He was supposedly a tourist, a writer, someone new to the city. Yet he seemed to have an almost proprietary interest in its flagship luxury hotel group. The more time they spent together, the deeper Mia's feelings grew. She loved his quiet intelligence, his unexpected humor, the way he looked at her as if she were a rare and precious discovery. The thought of him eventually leaving, of him just being a temporary fixture in her life, began to ache in a way she hadn't anticipated. For Leo, the deception was becoming a heavier burden. Each shared laugh, each moment of genuine connection, was tinged with the guilt of his unspoken truth. He'd come to Havenwood overworked, exhausted by the relentless pressures of his position, craving a moment of anonymity. Mia, with her vibrant spirit and her refreshingly honest view of the world, had been an unexpected gift, a sanctuary. He hadn't meant for the charade to last this long, hadn't anticipated falling so completely for the woman who thought he was just a lost tourist. The near revelation came on a rainy Tuesday. Mia had the day off, and Leo had suggested a visit to the City Art Museum. As they were leaving, huddled under a shared umbrella, they passed by the side entrance of the Havenwood, the one often used by staff and VIPs wanting to avoid the main lobby. A sleek black car was idling by the curb. Just as they approached, a hairy-looking woman in a sharp suit rushed out of the hotel, an iPad clutched in her hand. "Mr. Thorne," she exclaimed, relief flooding her face as she spotted Leo. "Thank goodness. We've been trying to reach you. The quarterly earnings call is in 30 minutes, and the board is—" She stopped abruptly, her eyes falling on Mia, her professional smile faltering into confusion. Leo froze. Mia felt his arm stiffen under her hand. He looked from the woman, clearly a high-level executive, to Mia, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Eleanor," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, all traces of the affable, lost tourist gone. "Not now." "But sir, the call—" Eleanor began, then trailed off as Leo shot her a look that could freeze fire. She blinked, then seemed to understand. "Of course, Mr. Thorne. My apologies." She gave Mia a quick, curious glance before retreating back into the hotel. Mia slowly pulled her hand away from Leo's arm. The rain suddenly felt colder. "Mr. Thorne," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. The name from the magazine cover echoed in her mind. The enigmatic Mr. Thorne, Havenwood's reclusive scion. Leo closed his eyes for a moment, a look of profound weariness settling on his features. He turned to face her, the rain dripping from his hair, his charming facade completely stripped away. "Mia," he began, his voice raw. "We need to talk." Her heart pounded. That wasn't the demeanor of a lost tourist. That was the demeanor of someone who was very much found, very much in charge, and very much not the person he had pretended to be. The city, her city, suddenly felt alien, the familiar streets shifting under her feet. The walk to Mia's favorite quiet park bench was filled with a suffocating silence. The rain had softened to a drizzle, but the air remained heavy with unspoken words. Mia sat, staring at a bedraggled rose bush, its petals clinging stubbornly despite the downpour. Leo stood a few feet away, looking out over the wet grass, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and strained. "My name is Leo Thorne. And yes, I own the Havenwood. And several others." Mia didn't look at him. The words hung in the air, cold and sharp. Owner of the Havenwood. Not a struggling writer. Not a lost tourist. A magnate. A man from a world so different from hers it might as well have been another planet. "Why?" she asked, her voice flat. It was the only word she could manage. He turned then, his face etched with regret. "When I first arrived, I was exhausted, burnt out. I just wanted a moment not to be Mr. Thorne, CEO. When I bumped into you, and you were so kind, so normal. I didn't want to spoil it. I wanted to see the city through your eyes, not from a boardroom or a press conference. It was selfish, cowardly." And then he hesitated. "Then I got to know you. And the lie just got bigger, harder to confess." Mia finally looked at him, her eyes stinging. "So, all of it? The getting lost, the writer story, the authentic experiences, it was all an act? Was I just an amusing diversion? Research for your next hotel's local color package?" The bitterness in her own voice surprised her. "No." Leo stepped closer, his hands reaching out as if to touch her, then dropping back to his sides. "No, Mia, not you. Not us. Getting to know you. That was the most real thing that's happened to me in years. The only real thing, maybe." His sincerity was palpable, but the betrayal was a fresh, stinging wound. "You lied to me, Leo. For weeks. I know. And I am so sorry. I was afraid if you knew who I was, you'd see the money, the title, not me. The person who trips over his own feet and can't fix a leaky faucet to save his life." A ghost of his old, self-deprecating smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. Mia felt a wave of conflicting emotions, anger, hurt, confusion, and underneath it all, a stubborn ache of the affection she developed for the man she thought he was, and perhaps the man he still might be, beneath the layers of wealth and responsibility. "I need some time, Leo," she said, her voice barely steady. I need to think." He nodded, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I understand. I'll be at the hotel. If you want to talk, or shout, or throw something." Mia watched him walk away, his silhouette receding into the gray drizzle. The man who had brought such unexpected color into her world had just revealed himself to be an elaborate illusion. Or had he? The question echoed in the hollow space he'd left behind. For 2 days, Mia avoided everything that reminded her of Leo. She called in sick to the daily grind, unable to face the sympathetic Kale or the curious regulars. She painted furiously, but the colors on her canvas were muddy and confused. Schrödinger, sensing her distress, curled up on her lap, an uncharacteristically comforting weight. She replayed their conversations, their shared laughter, the moments of quiet connection. Had it all been a performance on his part? She remembered the genuine delight in his eyes at Rosie's, his earnest, if clumsy, attempts to help her, the way he listened to her dreams. Those things had felt real. But the lie was a chasm between them. On the third morning, she found a small, exquisitely wrapped package outside her apartment door. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a first edition of her favorite obscure poet, a book she'd once mentioned wistfully in passing, saying she'd only ever seen it in museums. There was no note, just the book. It was a thoughtful, deeply personal gift. It was also, undoubtedly, very expensive. It was the gesture of a man who listened, who remembered. It was also the gesture of a man who could afford anything. She knew she couldn't leave it like this. The silence was worse than any confrontation. She needed to see him, to understand, to decide if the Leo she'd come to care for was lost somewhere inside Mr. Thorne, the hotel magnate. She found him not in the opulent penthouse suite she imagined, but in the hotel's sprawling, surprisingly beautiful rooftop garden, a place he'd once told her, in his writer guise, was his favorite spot for contemplation. He was staring out at the city skyline, her city, now his city too, looking every bit the powerful CEO, yet with an air of profound loneliness about him. He turned as she approached, his eyes widening slightly. He looked tired, older than he had just a few days ago. "Mia," he said, his voice quiet. "The book," she began, holding it up. "It's beautiful. Thank you. I remembered you mentioning it," he said simply. They stood in silence for a moment, the city humming below them. "Was any of it real, Leo?" Mia asked, the question she'd been wrestling with. "The man who got lost on Main Street, who loved Rosie's pie, who talked about pigeons with such seriousness, was he just a character you played?" Leo stepped closer, his gaze earnest, unwavering. "He was me, Mia. The part of me I'd almost forgotten existed. The part you brought back to life. The fear of losing that, of you seeing me only as this." He gestured vaguely to the luxurious surroundings. "That's why I lied. I was a coward. But what I felt, what we shared, that was never a lie." Mia searched his face. The hurt was still there, a dull ache in her chest. But she also saw the vulnerability he'd always tried to hide, the genuine regret in his eyes. She saw the man who had made her laugh, who had listened to her dreams, who had, despite everything, made her feel seen. "You're an idiot," she said, a small, watery smile finally touching her lips. A rich, complicated, linen-wearing idiot. Relief washed over Leo's face, so potent it was almost visible. "I know," he said, his own smile hesitant. "A spectacularly foolish one. And you still owe me a proper tour of this garden," Mia continued, her voice a little stronger. The Lost Tourist version was a bit lacking in detail. Leo's smile widened, reaching his eyes this time, chasing away some of the shadows. "I think I can arrange that. I might even know where the best views are for once." He took a step towards her, then paused, as if unsure. Mia closed the small remaining distance between them, her hand finding his. His fingers curled around hers, warm and firm. "So," she said, looking up at him, "Mr. Thorne, about that coffee, are you buying?" And this time, no pretending you don't know what a flat white is. He chuckled, a low, rich sound that made her heart lift. "Only if you promise to keep showing me the real city, Mia. The one beyond the balance sheets and boardrooms." "Deal," she said softly. The trust would need time to fully mend. The path ahead wouldn't be without its complexities. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw not the owner of the Havenwood, nor the lost tourist, but simply Leo. And for the first time in days, Mia felt a sense of hopeful, quiet certainty. This, she realized, was a detour worth taking. The city lights began to twinkle into life below them, painting streaks of gold against the darkening sky. The air was cool, but his hand in hers was warm. It felt like a beginning, fragile yet true. Thanks for watching. If you believe in second chances and real love, give this story a like and subscribe for more.